the Epiphany of our Lord Jesus Christ and the Magi. The kings arrive at Bethlehem. I saw the kings leaving Jerusalem in the same order in which they had come. They left by a gate to the south, first, Mensa, the youngest. Then Ser, and lastly, Thigino. They were followed by a crowd as far as a brook outside the city, and here the rabble left them and turned back home. On the opposite side of the brook, the kings halted and looked for their star. To their great joy, they saw it, and on again they went, singing sweetly. But what I wondered at was, that the star did not guide them by a direct route from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. They went more to the west and passed a little city that is well known to me. Beyond the same, I saw them halting at a beautiful place to pray. A well sprang up before them. They dismounted and dug a basin for the water, surrounding it with sand and sods. They remained here several hours and watered their beasts. For in Jerusalem, on account of their anxiety and trouble, they had had no rest. The star, which by night looked like a globe of light, now had the appearance of the moon when seen by day. But still it did not appear exactly round, but somewhat pointed. I saw that it was often hidden behind the clouds. The high road between Bethlehem and Jerusalem swarmed with people, travelers with their baggage on asses. They were, perhaps, on account of the census, returning from Bethlehem to distant homes, or going up to Jerusalem to the temple or the markets. But on the route taken by the kings, it was very quiet. Perhaps the star guided them that way, that they might escape notice, and arrive in Bethlehem in the evening. It was twilight when the caravan drew up before Bethlehem at the same gate at which Mary and Joseph had stopped. When the star had disappeared, the kings went to the house, the former abode of Joseph's parents, and in which Joseph and Mary had recently been inscribed. Here they thought they were to find the newborn king. It was a spacious mansion with numerous small buildings around it, an enclosed courtyard in front, and stretching beyond that a lawn with trees and a fountain. I saw on the lawn Roman soldiers, because of the tax offices in the house. Crowds of people thronged around the newcomers whose beasts were being watered under the trees near the fountain. The kings and their followers dismounted. The people showed them every mark of respect. They were not rude to them as they had been to Joseph. They presented green branches, and supplied them with food and drink. But I could see that was principally in consideration of the gold pieces which the kings were freely disbursing. I saw the travelers tarrying long in doubt and anxiety. At last, I saw a light rising in the heavens on the opposite side of Bethlehem over the region of the crib. The light was like that of the rising moon. I saw the caravan again set out and wind around the south side of Bethlehem toward the east, thus bringing on one hand the field in which Christ's birth had been announced to the shepherds. They had to go around a ditch and some ruined walls. They had made choice of this route, because they had while in Bethlehem been directed to the valley of the shepherds as a good place for encamping. Some of the Bethlehemites followed the cavalcade, but the kings said nothing to them of the object of their search. Saint Joseph appeared to know of their arrival. Whether he had learned it through someone from Jerusalem, or in vision, I know not. But I saw him during the day bringing all kinds of things from Bethlehem, fruit, honey, and vegetables. I saw him also clearing out the cave, making more room, taking away the partitions that cut off his own little sleeping place from the passage, and stowing away the wood and the cooking utensils under the shed before the door. When the caravan had filed down into the valley of the crib cave, all dismounted and began to set up their tents while the people that had crowded after them from Bethlehem returned to the city. The encampment was partly pitched when over the cave shone out the star and in it a child plainly visible. It stood directly above the crib, its stream of light falling straight down upon it. The kings and their followers uncovered their heads and watched it sinking lower and lower, increasing in size as it approached the earth. It looked to me as large as a sheet, I think. All were at first amazed. It was already dark. No dwelling was to be seen around, only the hill of the crib cave, looking like a rampart on the plain. But soon their amazement turned to joy, and they sought the entrance of the cave. Mensa pushed back the door and there, in the upper end of the cave, which was resplendent with light, he beheld Mary sitting with the child, and looking just like the Virgin they had so often seen in the star pictures. Mensa stepped back and told his companions what he had seen, then all three entered the passage. I saw Joseph coming out to them with an old shepherd, and speaking to them in quite a friendly way. The kings told him in a few words that they had come to adore the newborn king of the Jews whose star they had seen, and bring him gifts. Joseph humbly bade them welcome, and they went back to their tents, in order to prepare themselves for the ceremony of their presentation. The old shepherd accompanied the king's servants to the little valley behind the hill, where there were sheds and shepherd stalls, in order to care for the beasts. The caravan filled the whole of the little valley. And now I saw the kings taking down from the camels and putting on their wide, flowing mantles of yellow silk. They fastened around their girdles with little chains, bags, and golden boxes with knobs, that looked to me like sugar bowls. They, along with the flowing mantles, made them look quite broad. They took also a little table with low feet that could be opened and folded at pleasure. It served as a salver. A cloth with tasseled fringe was thrown over it, and on it placed the boxes and dishes containing the gifts. Each king was accompanied by his 4 relatives. All followed Saint Joseph with some of their servants to the shed before the entrance to the cave. Here they spread the cloth over the table and stood on it several of the boxes they had hanging at their girdles, to be presented as their gifts in common. Then 2 youths of Mensa's train went in at the door, laid down strips of carpet all the way up to the crib, and withdrew to a distance. And now Mensa and his 4 companions entered, having previously laid aside their sandals. 2 servants bore the table with the gifts through the passage up to the crib cave. But at the entrance, Mensa took it from them, carried it in himself, and on bended knee placed it at Mary's feet. The other kings and their companions remained standing at the entrance. I saw the cave filled with supernatural light. Opposite the entrance and on the spot where Jesus was born, was Mary leaning on one arm in a posture more reclining than sitting. By her side was Joseph, and on her right, in a raised trough with the cover thrown over it, lay the infant Jesus. At Mensa's entrance, Mary rose to a sitting posture, drew her veil around her, and took the child, which she enveloped in its folds, upon her lap. But she drew the veil aside sufficiently to allow the child to be seen as far as below the little arms. She held it upright leaning against her breast, its little head supported by her hand. The infant folded its little hands upon its breast as if in prayer. It was shining with light, was very gracious, and at times extended its little hands, as if grasping something. Mensa fell on his knees before Mary, bowed his head, crossed his hands on his breast, and offered the gifts with some reverent words. Then he took from the bag at his girdle a handful of little metal bars, about a finger in length, thick and heavy. They were pointed at the upper end, granular in the middle, and shone like gold. He laid them humbly on Mary's lap by the child, as his gift to her. Mary accepted them graciously and humbly, and covered them with the end of her mantle. Mensa's companions stood behind him with heads lowly bowed. Mensa gave gold, because he was full of loving confidence, and had always with unshaken devotion and untiring efforts, sought after salvation. When Mensa and his companions withdrew, Ser with his 4 relatives entered and knelt. He carried in his hand a golden censer, in shape like a boat, filled with small, greenish grains like resin. He gave incense, for he was the one that clung to God, voluntarily, reverently, and lovingly following his will. He placed his gift upon the little table, and knelt long in adoration. After Ser, came Thigino, the eldest of the kings. He could not kneel, because he was too old and stout. He stood bowing low, and laid upon the table a little golden ship in which was a fine, green herb. It was fresh and living, stood erect like a delicate green bush, and had small white flowers. Thigino offered myrrh, for myrrh is typical of mortification and vanquished passions. This good man had had to struggle against severe temptations to idolatry and polygamy. He remained very long before the infant Jesus, so long that I felt anxious for the good people, the king's followers, who at the entrance were so patiently awaiting their turn to see the child. The words of the kings and their followers were extraordinarily simple and childlike. They were as if inebriated with love. They always began, "We have seen his star and that he is king over all kings. We have come to adore him and to bring him gifts." With the tenderest tears and most fervent prayers, they commended to the child Jesus themselves, their goods, and property, all that they valued on earth. They begged him to take their hearts, their souls, their actions, their thoughts. They entreated him to enlighten them, to bestow upon them all the virtues, and to the whole earth to grant peace, happiness, and love. They were glowing with love. No words could depict their ardor and humility, nor the tears of joy that bathed their cheeks and flowed down the beard of the eldest. They were perfectly happy. They believed that, at last, they had entered into the star after which their forefathers had so long legitimately sighed, and at which they themselves had so longingly gazed. All the joy of the promise of many hundreds of years now fulfilled, welled up in their hearts. Joseph and Mary also wept. I never before had seen them so full of joy. The honor paid their child and Saviour, and the recognition of him by the kings, of that child for whom their poverty could afford so poor a couch, of that child the knowledge of whose high dignity lay hidden in the silent humility of their own hearts, all that comforted them immeasurably. They saw brought to him from so great a distance by God's almighty power, and in spite of the machinations of man, what they themselves could not procure for him, viz. The adoration of the great and magnificent gifts offered with holy profusion. They adored with those great ones, and the honor their child received inundated their heart with exceedingly great joy. The Mother of God accepted everything most humbly and thankfully. She spoke not, but the movement of her veiled head told all. The infant Jesus lay on her mantle and covered by her veil, through which his little form shone brightly. It was only at the close of their visit that the Blessed Virgin addressed some kind words to each, throwing her veil back a little as she spoke. The kings now returned to their tents, which were lighted up and looked very beautiful. At last, the good servants arrived at the crib. During the adoration of the kings, they had with Joseph's help erected a white tent on the hill toward the shepherd field to the left of the crib cave. They had brought with them on their beasts of burden the tent with all its covers and poles, the latter of which fitted into one another. At first I thought that Joseph had put it up, and I began to wonder where he had got it so quickly and opportunely. But when the caravan was about to leave, I saw the tent taken down and packed up with the rest. There was a kind of shed of straw matting put up in it, under which the chests were placed. After the servants had pitched the tent and arranged all things in it, they took their stand at the door of the crib cave, humbly awaiting admittance. And now they began to enter, 5 at a time, accompanied by one of the nobles to whom they belonged. They knelt before Mary, and silently adored the child. Lastly, came the boys in their little mantles, and then there may have been in all about 30 persons present. When all had withdrawn, the kings again came in together. They had changed their mantles for others of raw silk, white and flowing, and they carried censers and incense. 2 servants had previously laid down over the floor of the cave a carpet of a deep red color, on which Mary sat with the child while the kings offered incense. This carpet Mary kept ever afterward. She walked on it, and took it with her on the ass to Jerusalem when she went there for her purification. The kings incensed the child, Mary, Joseph, and the whole cave. This was with them a ceremony expressive of veneration. I saw the kings afterward in the tent reclining on a carpet around a little low table. Joseph brought in little plates of fruit, rolls, honeycomb, and small dishes of vegetables. Then he sat down and ate with them. He was so delighted, and not at all shamefaced. He wept for joy almost the whole time. When I saw that, I thought of my own father, and how, at my profession in the convent, he had to sit among so many fine people. In his humility and simplicity, he had indeed felt intimidated, but it did not prevent his giving vent to his feelings in tears of joy. When Joseph returned to the crib cave, he removed all the rich gifts to a recess at the right of the crib, where he had screened a little corner from sight. Anne's maid, who had remained to wait upon Mary, retired to the little cellar-like cave on the left of the crib cave, and did not come forth until all the visitors had departed. She was a quiet, modest person. I saw neither Mary nor Joseph nor the maid examining the gifts or showing any worldly pleasure on their account. They were accepted with thanks, and with liberality were again distributed to the needy. That maid was a relative of Anne, and a robust and very serious person. On this evening and during the night, I saw in Bethlehem only at Joseph's paternal house a noisy bustling to and fro, and, when the kings entered the city, there was some little excitement. Around the crib cave all was, at first, very quiet. After a while, I saw here and there in the distance Jews lurking and whispering together, and giving notice in the city of what they saw. I saw also in Jerusalem on this day many old Jews and priests hurrying to and fro with writings to Herod, and then all became quiet as if they wished the subject dropped. At last, the kings with their people held, under the cedar over the suckling cave, a religious service. The singing was most touching, the boys' sweet voices mingling with those of the elders. After the service, the kings went with a part of their followers to a large inn at Bethlehem. The others slept in the tents between the crib and the suckling cave, which latter they had also taken possession of for the storing of part of their treasures. The white tent before the crib was occupied by some of the most distinguished of the nobles. The second day of the kings at the crib and their departure. On the next day, the kings again visited the crib cave separately. During the whole day, I saw much given away by them, especially to the shepherds out in the field where the beasts had been sheltered. I saw poor old women bent with age going around with mantles over their shoulders given them by the king's generosity. I saw crowds of Jews from Bethlehem thronging around the good people, trying by every means in their power to extort presents from them, and looking through all that they had with a design to cheat. I saw the kings freeing several of their people who wanted to remain among the shepherds. They gave them some of the beasts of burden with all kinds of covers and vessels packed on them, also golden grains, or gold dust, and they parted from them most cordially. I know not why their number was so diminished. Perhaps many went away, or were sent home the preceding night. There was also a quantity of bread given away. I do not know where they got so much, but true it is that they had it. They were accustomed to bake wherever they encamped. I think they must already have received the warning to diminish their luggage as much as possible on their return journey. That evening I saw the kings in the crib cave, taking leave. Mensa entered first alone, and the Blessed Virgin gave him the child in his arms. He shed abundant tears, and his face was beaming with joy. Then followed the others and took leave with many tears. They again offered numerous gifts, a great roll of precious stuff, pieces of silk, some whitish, others red, also flowered stuffs, and many very fine covers. They left their large mantles also with the Holy Family. They were fine wool of a pale delicate color, and so light that they floated on the breeze. They brought also numerous dishes piled one above the other, boxes of grain, and a basket full of pots containing delicate green plants bearing tiny leaves and white blossoms. About 3 of these small pots stood in the middle of a larger one. Still another could have found room between them and the rim of the large pot. They were arranged in the basket, one above the other. There were also long, narrow baskets containing birds, such as I had seen hanging on the dromedaries, and which they used for food. They all wept much when parting from the child and Mary. I saw the Blessed Virgin standing by them when they took their leave. The king's gifts were received by Mary and Joseph with touching humility and sincere thanks to the donors, but without any manifestations of pleasure. During the whole of this wonderful visit, I never saw in Mary the least shadow of self-interest. In her love for the child Jesus and compassion for Saint Joseph, she thought that the possession of these treasures would, perhaps, prevent their being treated in Bethlehem with such contempt as had been shown them upon their arrival, for Joseph's trouble and mortification on that account had been to her a source of suffering. Lamps were already lighted in the crib cave, when the kings took leave. They went out behind the hill toward the east, to the field in which were their people and beasts. In it stood a high tree whose spreading boughs shaded a wide circumference. The tree was very old and had a legend of its own, for Abraham and Melchizedek had met under its branches. The shepherds and the people around regarded it as sacred. A spring gushed up before it, the waters of which the shepherds used at certain seasons on account of their healing qualities. There was near the tree a furnace which could be covered, and at both sides huts affording shelter at night. A hedge surrounded the whole tract. Thither went the kings, and found all the followers still remaining to them gathered together. A light was suspended from the tree, and under it they prayed, and sang with indescribable sweetness. Joseph entertained the kings again in the tent by the crib, and then they and their nobles returned to their inn at Bethlehem. Meanwhile, the governor of the city, acting on a secret order from Herod or moved by a spirit of officiousness, I know not, had resolved to arrest the kings then in Bethlehem, and accuse them to Herod as disturbers of the peace. I know not when he was going to execute his resolve, but to the kings that night in Bethlehem and to their followers in their tents near the crib, an angel appeared in sleep, warning them to depart forthwith and to hasten home by another way. Those in the tents immediately awakened Joseph, and told him the order just received. While they proceeded to arouse the whole encampment and order the tents to be taken down, which was done with incredible speed, Joseph hurried off to Bethlehem to announce it to the kings. But they, leaving most of their baggage behind them, had already started from the city. Joseph met them on the way and told them his errand. They informed him that they, too, had received similar instructions from an angel. Their hurried departure was unnoticed in Bethlehem. Issuing forth quietly and without their baggage, an observer might have concluded that they were going to their people, perhaps for prayer. While they were still in the cave, weeping and taking leave, their followers were already starting in separate bands in order to be able to travel more quickly, and were hurrying to the south, by a route different from that by which they had come, through the desert of En-Gedi along the Dead Sea. The kings implored the Holy Family to flee with them. On their refusal, they begged Mary at least to conceal herself with Jesus in the suckling cave, that she might not on their account be molested. They left many things to Saint Joseph to give away. The Blessed Virgin, taking the veil from her head, bestowed it upon them. She had been accustomed to envelope the infant Jesus in its folds when holding him in her arms. The kings still held the child in their arms. They were shedding tears and uttering most touching words. At last they gave their light silk mantles to Mary, mounted their dromedaries, and hurried away. I saw the angel by them in the field, pointing out the way they should take. The caravan was now much smaller, and the beasts but lightly burdened. Each king rode at about a quarter of an hour's distance from the others. They seemed to have vanished all on a sudden. They met again in a little city, and then rode forward less rapidly than they had done on leaving Bethlehem. I always saw the angel going on before them, and sometimes speaking with them. Mary, wrapping the child Jesus in her mantle, at once withdrew to the suckling cave. The gifts of the kings and all that they had left, were also taken thither by the shepherds who had tarried around the encampment in the valley. The king's people who had preferred to remain behind their masters lent a helping hand. The 3 oldest of the shepherds, who had been the first to do homage to Jesus, received very rich presents from the kings. When it was discovered in Bethlehem that the caravan had departed, the travelers were already near En-Gedi, and the valley in which they had encamped was, with the exception of some tent poles left standing and the footprints in the grass, lonely and still as before. The appearance of the royal caravan had caused great excitement in Bethlehem. Many now regretted that they had refused lodgings to Joseph. Some spoke of the kings and their followers as of a swarm of adventurers, while others connected their advent with the accounts they had heard of the wonderful apparitions to the shepherds. I saw from the city hall a proclamation made to the assembled citizens, viz., that they should beware of all preposterous opinions and superstitious reports, and go no more to the abode of those people outside the city. When the crowd had dispersed, I saw Joseph at 2 different times conducted to the city hall. The second time, he took with him some of the gifts of the kings, which he presented to the old Jews who had taken him to task, and he was set at liberty. There was another way leading from the city to the neighborhood of the crib cave, not by the city gate, but from that place where Mary, on the evening of her arrival with Joseph in Bethlehem, had rested under the tree while waiting for Joseph to find a lodging. This point of egress I saw the Jews blocking up with the fallen tree. They also erected a watch house with a bell from which was a rope stretched across the road. Thus anyone trying to go that way would soon be discovered. I saw also about 16 soldiers with Joseph at the crib cave. But when they found besides himself only Mary and the child, they returned to the city to report. Joseph had carefully concealed the royal gifts. There were other caves in the hill under that of the crib. No one knew of them but Joseph, who had discovered them long ago in his boyhood. They had existed from the time of Jacob who, when Bethlehem counted only a couple of huts, had there a tent with his followers. The gifts of the kings, the woven stuffs, the mantles, the golden vessels all after the resurrection were consecrated to religious uses. Each king had 3 light mantles and 1, thick and heavy, for bad weather. The thin ones were of very fine wool, yellow and red mixed, and so light that they floated on the breeze as the wearers moved along. On festive occasions, they were exchanged for mantles of silk. They were not dyed, but of the original, lustrous shade. The train was embroidered around the edge with gold, and it was so long that it had to be carried. I had also a vision of the raising of silkworms. In a region between the country of Ser and Thikino, I saw trees full of silkworms. Every tree was surrounded by a little ditch of water, in order to prevent the worms from crawling away. Fodder was scattered under the trees, and from their branches hung little boxes. Out of these boxes the weavers took chrysalids, about a finger in length, from which they wound off a web like that of a spider. They fastened a number of these chrysalids before the breast, and spun from them a fine thread which they rolled on a piece of wood provided with a hook. I saw the silk weavers among the trees at their looms, which were very simple. The strips of stuff woven were as wide, perhaps, as my bed. After the departure of the kings, the Holy Family went over into the other cave, and I saw the crib cave quite empty, the ass alone still standing there. Everything, even the hearth, had been cleared away. I saw Mary peaceful and happy in her new abode, which had been arranged somewhat comfortably. Her couch was near the wall, and by her rested the child Jesus in an oval basket made of broad strips of bark. The upper end of the basket, where the head of the infant Jesus lay, was arched over with a cover. The basket itself stood on a woven partition, before which Mary sometimes sat with the child beside her. Joseph had a separate space at a little distance. Above the movable partition, there projected from the wall a pole to which a lamp was suspended. I saw Joseph bringing in a pitcher of water and something in a dish. But he did not go any more to Bethlehem for necessaries. The shepherds brought him all that he needed. Amen.